Hello there, this is Leslie J. Mayer, and as promised, I said I was going to come on and do a live here. I'm just going to share this to my group, and it's not working yet. Interesting. Okay, so I'm not going to share it to my group. All right. So something happened when I was 18 that changed my voice and what it means to me. We were driving back on Saturday night. It was my boyfriend and I. The country was at war. We were going back to the army base, and he had just finished his basic training. He was not yet assigned to a specific unit, so he wanted to volunteer his services and fight for his country. And each week since the war had broken out, he had been going on his own back and forth to the army base. And I don't know why, but this particular time, I decided to go with him. We were in the back of a pickup truck. It was a closed-in pickup truck. This was a no-frills vehicle used for transporting anything that was necessary. And there were just, in the back, there were these flip-up benches, one on either side. No seat belts, no handrests, no nothing like that. It was just the benches and this tiny little window that connected us to the front of the pickup truck and one tiny little window in the back there. But it was dark. There were no street lights allowed and no headlights because of the war. So it was pitch black. We couldn't see a thing, and we were completely unaware of what was going to happen. And as we were going around a bend, an army truck collided with us and hit us exactly where we were sitting. So to this day, I have no recollection at all of the accident itself, but I've just sort of pieced together little parts of it from what I was told. And the next morning, I woke up in the hospital, and I must have known something happened because I asked the doctor where my boyfriend was, and they had instructed him not to tell me the truth. I had moved halfway around the world to be with him. I left my family back in Canada. We'd been together for 3 years, and they were afraid that I wouldn't be strong enough to hear the news. But I'm so grateful that he told me the truth, and I remember his words very clearly. He said to me that my boyfriend wasn't strong enough, and he didn't make it. He wasn't as strong as I was, and he didn't make it. And those words kept me going through the whole time I was in my recovery in the hospital, and have stayed with me for my whole life. And at that one moment of the accident, even though I don't remember it, I do remember feeling like I was, a young woman that I was, 18 years old, lively, and in this one instant going and feeling like I was an old lady. My body ached from pain. Hi, Christy. My body ached from pain, and I felt I was confined to bed, and I felt like I'd lost my freedom. But there was no choice. That's what it was. This was my life now. In the hospital, I had no idea how serious it was at the beginning, but they told my mom, and they told her to come. And she said, okay. After arranging a few flights, she realized that she could come on Tuesday, and this accident was on Saturday night. And they told her, don't wait. Don't wait. So I can just put myself in my mom's shoes. And she's got to travel to a war zone. And she thinks her daughter is dying. But she did. She got here as soon as she could, and she came to stay with me. And what happened after that was because of this accident. The reason I was in so much pain was that my ribs were broken and some were cracked and they ripped me inside. And one of my lungs was punctured. So when I got to the hospital, I was blue. They hooked me up to a respirator, and also they had to do an emergency, they just rushed me in for emergency surgery because my spleen had ruptured. And so I had this big wound all the way down my stomach. Now, since then, like I've been, that whole time I was not able to speak or eat or drink anything because of the respirator. And I was hooked up to all these tubes, the drainage tubes. I was like, everything was artificial. And I was bedridden. Couldn't get out of bed, I couldn't communicate. The only thing I could do was sign language. Some makeshift sign language that I had to, just make up and hope they'd understand, or write on pieces of papers. This was like in 1973. There were no digital, we couldn't send texts or messages or anything like that. And so that was my communication. And after about 10 days, they decided that it was time to check and see whether I could breathe on my own, whether my lungs, the lung that was completely punctured, whether it had healed enough. And they'd been doing multiple x-rays, like every day, just to see the progress. And they decided this one day that they thought I could. So they told me they're gonna do this test, just a trial for 30 seconds. And I was terrified. I was terrified. But I didn't want to stay in the hospital. I'd been learning so much about pain and endurance and strength through this whole time. And this was just one more thing that I had to go through. And I had to agree because I wanted to get better and I didn't want to stay on this respirator forever, that's for sure. So they did the trial and it worked. It was so scary. I was like terrified that I had to breathe on my own here, but I did it. And then they hooked me up again. They asked me whether I wanted to continue on. And I said, no way, no way, no way, no way. My first thought was I don't want to ever be unhooked from this respirator again in my life. I need this machine. But they said, fine, they just let it be. And that evening, that night, something happened. I had a bad dream, and I must have known, that it was my time to get off this respirator, because what happened was I was so, I was frantic because I woke up from this bad dream and I couldn't breathe because this respirator, it's got that steady pace, it's got this slow and steady, slow and steady, slow and steady. And it has no sensitivity of the human being on the other end of the tubes. So I was just, I couldn't breathe as quickly as I wanted to because I was frantic, in stress from this bad dream, and I couldn't calm myself down, and I had to communicate to the nurse because I was in intensive care. I had to communicate with her quickly that something was wrong. So I clapped my hands and she came running over and she called the medical staff and they all gathered around. And here I am feeling like I'm suffocating. And what could I do? I had to communicate somehow that I wanted them to unhook the respirator again. And they understood me. They actually understood me very quickly, and they did it. They had no idea what was wrong. I couldn't tell them I was having a bad dream. I couldn't speak, nothing. And they unhooked it, and then those first minutes were so terrifying because here I was with all these broken bones, from my ribs. Everything hurt me so much, and my muscles weren't used to breathing on my own, and I had to take these deep breaths because if you can imagine when you breathe on your own, you've got a whole passageway through your nostrils or your mouth, and you can breathe. But here I was going through this little tiny tube that was going in one nostril, and it goes straight through my vocal cords. There was another tube in there for me to eat from food that went through my nose into my stomach. And there was this tiny little opening, and I was hurting so much from the cutting, from the wound that I had, and from my broken bones, and all the tubes were in me. It was horrible, and it was terrifying. So the thing I remember most about that was, like, I have to do this. I have to breathe on my own, as frightening as it was and as difficult, because I'm gonna die. I'm gonna die if I don't get through this. So I did, and the seconds turned into minutes, and then the minutes turned into hours, and then it was evident that I could breathe on my own here. And in the morning, and I kept on going, and in the morning they gathered around again and asked me whether I wanted to, whether it was okay, whether they took out the tubes. And I was afraid, but I realized, like, I've been breathing on my own for all these hours now, since the middle of the night, and it's time. So I said, okay. And what they were waiting for, and I didn't know this at the time, but afterwards they told me, after they removed the tubes, and they asked me to speak. And I didn't know it, that the problem with the respirator going down for this amount of time, like the 10 days that I was so terrified, believe me. The thing is, I couldn't speak because it went through my vocal cords, and it had scarred my vocal cords. And they didn't know whether I was going to speak again. And also they asked me to talk, and out came this frog voice. And I was so surprised, because that wasn't my voice. That's not the voice I had 10 days ago. And they were all cheering and celebrating, and like the relieved that I had control of my vocal cords, at least. And of course my voice has softened since then, and it's become, you know, it's different than it was. It's now softer and raspier than it used to be. But this voice, and like the scars have softened, my emotional scars, my physical scars, and the sadness that went on all through that time. The thing is, I realized if I could get through that, I can get through anything. And what my voice now means to me is that all these scars also, they've given me a different perspective. They hold the wisdom and the different perspective of life. I'm seeing it as, you know, with a different view after going through all this. And now my voice, whenever I open my mouth and speak, I hear what it is, and it's different than it used to be. And it reminds me of, you know, how brave and courageous I was, and everything I've been through my whole life. So that's the story of my voice and what it means to me now. So thank you all for being here and watching, whether it's live or in the replay. And until next time, bye-bye.